Allies or Enemies by Peachiibunnii, Chapter 11. Scar sighed heavily, wiping debris off his shoulder as he watched a police car pull up. He smiled and waved, knowing there wasn't much to do after a minimal attack of a creeper again. He managed to destroy it before it exploded, luckily gaining another piece of evidence to see if they could track them back to where they originally came from. There's not much luck, but it was the only thing Scar could do. He turned to head off, hopefully not having to be called back in later in the day. He'd fallen behind in grading his students' work and needed that extra time to get a few more done. Ever since Kyuko stopped showing up, he'd been doing everything alone. Scott never knew how much he'd missed the other until he was struggling to do all the work alone. Thinking of him only made his mind fill with regret. He ended up getting the other hurt. He considered it to be his fault, no matter how much Cub tries to convince him otherwise. He attempted to shake those thoughts, forcing himself to focus on his work and not his guilt. Just as he was about to bounce off the road and get onto the roof of a building, he spotted a familiar hoodie. He rose and turned to see Pearl, Green's sister from the attack a week ago. He was hoping it was Green, to be honest, when he saw the red. At least like this, it would be a bit easier to approach her rather than interacting with Green as Hawkeye. Pearl, he called out as he came up to her, getting her attention. She looked confused before spotting him, her face shifting to a mix of excitement and shock. Pearl, right? You're the girl from the attack a week ago. Your, brother, was it? He asked, pretending to be clueless. Grian? How is he? Last I spoke to him, he said he was super stressed and needed a bit of a break. Pearl's smile immediately dropped, hands tightening on the bag in her hands. Ah, it was very sweet of you to check in. Sorry, it's just he's actually really sick right now, she admitted, thinking of Grian at home, probably still heavily sleeping like he had been for the past 4 days. I think he's come down with something, she mumbled, thinking of the poison. Maybe it's because he's always working and now his body is taking this time to really get in all the extra rest it can. He's just been sleeping for a couple of days straight, so there isn't much of an update. Sorry if you were hoping for something more exciting. Scott frowned, feeling bad for his co-worker and friend. It seemed both of the people he spent most of his time with were currently recovering. Oh no, I don't mind. I care about everyone in the city, even if I haven't learned everyone's names or faces yet. I plan to eventually. Scott smiled. From the way he spoke, he sounded like he really did care, which wasn't far from the truth. He prided himself in bonding with people as Hawkeye, being a beloved superhero. Pearl smiled and gestured to the bag in her hands. Well, I'd better get back to him, she mumbled softly. I don't want to leave him alone right now. He's probably still asleep, but I want to be there with him, you know? She smiled and waved gently to him. It's super nice seeing you, she began before thinking of something that only she would probably think to ask. Uh, before I go, what happened to Cute Guy? She asked innocently, as if she didn't have a clue. I'm so used to interviewing you and him, but recently I haven't seen or heard anything about him. Scar tensed up, staring at her. He was lucky his shocked expression was caught behind his visor and unable to be seen. That's a good question, he mumbled, playing dumb himself. I haven't seen him in a couple days, if I'm honest. He lied, frowning deeply. He didn't even tell me he would disappear, he frowned. Pearl smiled gently, biting her tongue as best as she could. What she would give to snap and accuse the other of lying. She sighed and shrugged. You don't think he's hurt, do you? She asked suddenly, seeing the other jump. Scar frowned deeply, starting to wonder if she knew more than she was letting on. No, I don't think so, Scar turned, needing to leave before this conversation revealed some information no one needed to know. If that's the case, I should try and find him or search into his disappearance, Scar mumbled, changing his tone to a much more serious one to fool Pearl. I should go now. I should go spend time. You should go spend time with your brother. He tried to end the conversation quickly, getting them both out of there. Pearl perked up and nodded. Right, she said before moving to jog the other direction, waving back at him. I'll try and interview you some other time, she shouted, Scott picking up easily on the joke. He chuckled softly as he watched her go before checking the time. He sighed, knowing he needed to get back to his apartment, although he knew if he did, he'd only be haunted by the guilt and regret he held over not being able to protect the closest people in his life. Just the thought made him feel ill. He placed his hands on his hips and looked at the sky. He longed to see his favorite masked friend in the sky or pop up behind him and scare him. He had no idea where he even was, though. All he knew is he lived a human life and hid his wings, so he could be anyone. Scott never realized how much the two took up his time or life. Cute Guy was always there to pester and annoy him. As much as he hated being scared or even slightly startled, somehow he found himself longing for the other's attention in his absence. That doesn't mean Scar thinks the other will forgive him. He seemed pretty angry, rightfully so for someone who just got shot. By the time he did make it to his apartment, Scar felt absolutely stupid bringing that gun into the fight. He knew his bad gut feeling was right when he first received the weapon. Now it lay in his closet with the multitude of other equipment he either refused to use or broke ages ago. He hated this feeling, knowing he hurt someone he cared about and messed things up with yet another person in his life. After Grin took some time off work to spend some time with his family and step away from the stresses of his job, he knew he'd be sad at work, but not this upset. Somehow, he managed to mess up twice in such a short time. Now he was forced to work alone and go days without seeing his favorite coworker, and live with the guilt of knowing an innocent hybrid got hurt and could potentially be dying because of him. He knew the masked man was strong enough to handle most things, but even Scar didn't know how this weapon would affect someone. It had been days without hearing from either of them. Well, that's a lie. He messaged Grian on occasion and realized he'd gotten violently ill. After Pearl told him, it clicked in his head. Alone with his thoughts in a quiet bedroom, still in uniform, he took his visor entirely off, letting his messy curls fall around his face. He stared at his phone, looking over a handful of contacts. His finger hovered over one, knowing if anyone would be logical enough to ease his overthinking or give him a proper reality check, it would be Cub. A rather hesitant, emotionally teeth-pulling text, and he put his phone away immediately after it was sent, knowing the other would let him into the lab regardless of the situation. Scar, 3:40 p.m. Need some advice. Coming up. He made a glance at the gun and a quick grab of it before he finally was ready. Scar was never much of anyone to ask for help unless he really needed it. So for him to need Cub of all people for emotions at that, it was almost a little funny. He felt his phone go off as he left the apartment. Through the window, of course, ignoring it. If Cub agreed, easy. If not, he'd be showing up anyway. Almost all the way through his run-through, he decided he probably should check the message just in case Cub was in a meeting or had planned something Scar shouldn't be around. He slowed down enough, seeing the entrance to the other's house on top of another roof. He fished his phone from his pocket. Checked the message. Cub, 3:50 p.m. If it's about your bird friend, I must say I'm not a good therapist. Scar, 4:21 p.m. What are you saying? You're the best. Scar, 4:22 p.m. Anyway, coming in. See you soon. Smiley face. Scar happily put his phone away and jumped to scale the large building, climbing up the rest of the wall to get to the top. He went in through the roof entrance, easily scaling the spiral stairs until he found the door to Cub's lab. Well, the door to his back room that led to his lab. Scar had actually never been into his lab through the main entrance, except once or twice. He'd gotten so used to coming in through the roof, it just felt natural. As Scar walked in, he passed the shelves of extra parts of robotic pieces and odd wires. Each time he came in, they were arranged or scattered in all sorts of different ways. He walked further to the door leading to his lab and opened it slowly, spotting his longtime friend. He smiled widely at the other, watching him spark something on his table. He was wearing a mask and giant gloves for protection. Scar jumped and yelped when something loud popped on the table, causing even Cub to jump in surprise. What is that? Scar yelled loud enough for the scientist to hear. Cub turned to see the other, mask still on. He set the tool to hold the device down, letting it cool down. He pulled his gloves and mask off setting them on the table further away from the cylindrical device. Magnet, he said simply. Scar tilted his head and stared at his friend in confusion. Cub reached into a box that Scar long knew as the scrap pile that didn't work the way Cub wanted. He pulled a glove, much similar to Scar's, onto his hand and pulled what appeared to be a pole out of the box. To Scar's surprise, the scientist chucked it as hard as he could into the open space of his lab, but it only got so far before it came back to Cub's palm, catching it easily. Scar seemed amazed, watching his work in progress. Magnet, Scar repeated, far more excited than the actual creator. It's for your bow. Cub smiled at the other, going to drop the pole, only for it to stick to his hand. After I figure out how to make it work the way I want, he muttered, struggling to get the glove off with the pole still attached to his palm. You mean I'll be able to throw my bow and recall it to my hand? Scar seemed happy, regardless of Cub seemingly being upset with his progress. That's amazing. I can't wait for it to be done. Scar beamed at the shorter man. Cub scoffed a little, but smiled anyway. Don't be so happy. Why did you come here anyway? You said you needed advice? Cub asked, moving to inspect the hot gear from before he'd been working on it. Scar frowned, staring at the box of rejected projects to pull out the glove and pole Cub had just deposited. Scar sighed, moving to sit on his table. No matter how many times Cub lectured him to not sit on his work table, he slid his glove off and put Cub's on, throwing the pole to recall it with the glove as he collected his thoughts. I kind of hurt someone by accident, he explained. Cub glanced at him, moving back a couple of steps to pull his work chair closer to the table. He grabbed the smaller industrial torch and began to work without his gloves. Is this why your bird friend hasn't been active lately? Cub asked, almost immediately figuring out Scar's troubles. Scar faltered, the pole hitting his palm a little too hard that made him grip it tightly. He sighed and lowered his arm, holding it in his lap. Yes, he got shot. He paused, pulling the gun he was given from his pocket. With this, Scar said softly, meeting Cub's eyes. Cub slid the project from before aside, moving to investigate the gun. He looked at Scar as if he would explain. Exelco explained to me that the bullets were laced with something from the Undercity. I don't know who's the producer for our weaponry, but I saw what this did to him. He looked violently ill, and his blood was turning black. And I know his blood isn't black, because he's some hybrid or something. I think it was the thing on the bullets, Scar explained, looking over to see Cub had already taken the gun halfway apart and was inspecting the bullets. He picked one up with tongs and set it down quickly. He looked highly confused and concentrated on finding something as he moved to the fridge where Scar knew there would be a lot of chemicals and things Cub had once yelled at him for so much as thinking is going inside. The scientist came out holding a plastic white container that was blank. He walked over to a nearby table, setting a glass beaker on the flat podium. Scar realized the other was setting up an experiment of some sort. He'd seen the scene a handful of times that ended in a mass explosion. Scar watched Cub work, not understanding the chemical or equipment in the slightest. He never knew what chemicals were called or what the reactions would do. He probably should, but he had too much on his plate already. He watched Cub lower a piece of glass from the ceiling on chains, slotting it into a thin slot in the ground for it to slide into. Pull your visor down, Cub said, moving to grab his own mask. He grabbed the bullet with the tongs and walked to the bottle on the table. He quickly dropped the bullet into the bottle before running to the other side of the glass. Scar did as he was told. Safety behind the glass already from where he sat on the table. He pulled his visor down for protection and watched as it appeared to be doing nothing. Just as Scar began to speak, the liquid began to cloud with black liquid, an oil-like substance floating to the top. It slowly began to boil, leaving Scar a little confused. Then it shattered, exploded against the glass at lightning speed, leaving a black sizzling liquid all over the floor and podium. Scar looked horrified, watching the reaction. He glanced at Cub in horror and began to slightly shake, thinking of what this might have felt like in your body. He swallowed, feeling a wave of anxiety wash over him. Cub took off his welding mask and frowned, glancing at Scar. I'm not sure where your friend is, but if he was shot with this bullet, his friend trailed off thinking, it's unfortunate that that was pure water and nothing more. I'm not sure what its reaction to blood, let alone a human body, could have been. Scar felt sick, wondering if his friend was even alive at the rate the bottle exploded. Cub, I need to find him, Scar whispered, moving to stand up. Excuse me? Cub stopped the other in his tracks. You don't even know who he is behind the mask. You know nothing about his whereabouts, or what his name even is. You're not going to find him just by looking. You don't even know if... Cub cut himself off, looking at Scar. Scar looked slightly annoyed, but his face softened. He moved to sit in Cub's chair, leaning back in it. You're right. There's nothing I can do, even if I wanted to, he muttered, groaning as he placed his head in his hands. The guilt began sinking in again, knowing it was his fault the other could be dead on his account. The thought alone made him shiver, making him feel nauseous. Cub seemed to recognize his distress, coming up beside him to lean against the table with his arms crossed. I know it's hard, but this is the risk you took when you became a superhero. People get hurt. Good people. And although I can't personally say I think this cute guy or whatever is good, I know you think he is. And that says a lot to me. Cub frowned. Just give it time. He could be out there. Maybe he's just tending to the wound the best he can, he explained. I tried to help him, Scar admitted. I tried to bring him to you. You would have known what to do, but he refused. He wouldn't let me. He didn't. Gar clenched his teeth, letting go of some of his frustration and anger. He didn't trust me. He didn't want my help. If he would have just let me help him. Scar could feel himself getting angry, but he didn't understand why. Even Cub was a little confused at Scar's outburst, but he seemed to understand Scar's emotions a little further than Scar himself. Because you care. You care about him more than he does himself, and you want him to care about himself and want to seek help. But you need to understand Scar. He's scared. He's a hybrid. But you would have helped him. Scar gestured out of frustration. But did he know that? Scar Cub asked, making Scar realize the point he was getting across. We're human, Scar. He's hybrid. You have to understand he's never going to fully trust a human or let us help him. That's unfortunately just how hybrids' brains are wired. Even with your dynamic, he doesn't even know you or your intentions behind the mask. He could have doubts and think you're using him to eventually, I don't know, get him banned from the city, kidnapped and experimented on, murdered? You don't know what's going on inside his mind, Cub tried to explain to the hero. Scar frowned, patted even. He'd gotten so angry and worked up over the anti-hero, he'd forgotten sometimes he didn't live the same life as everyone above the surface. He'd already been through so much growing up in the Undercity, and now Scar had to go and get him shot. Scar cringed at the memory of the other, weak and curled up on the ground, dazed and confused. He wanted to know where the other was. How do I show him? Scar asked softly, knowing Cub wouldn't be able to answer the question. Cub laughed a little, walking around the glass to inspect the liquid. How should I know? Shouldn't you be asking him yourself? Cub asked, crouching next to the substance. He made a mental note to gather a sample and do some experiments behind his job's back. Would be great if I knew where he was, or if I knew he was even alive, Scar noted, quietly down when he heard a loud shriek in the distance. It sounded miles away, but close, almost near the building they were in. Did you hear that? Scar asked randomly, pulling Cub from his thoughts. What? Cub asked, standing up to place his hands in his lab coat pockets. Scar waited, but didn't seem to hear anything else after that. Nothing, I guess, he mumbled. Maybe the stress was getting to him. Never mind. Maybe I'm starting to hallucinate, he half joked. Seeing Cub scrape the black, now tar-like substance into a bottle. He watched in horror as the bottle seemed to be dyed black, anything the liquid touched, coating the inside until it dried. Cub frowned and stood up to stare at it in his test tube. I'm going to do some tests on this, and get back to you with anything I find out. See if I see if I call so see if I can so-called cure it and destroy it with some makeshift antidote to possibly flush out your boyfriend's system. Scott blushed at the nickname, but smiled shyly. He's not my boyfriend per se, Scott mumbled. I do have my eyes on someone special though. What? The what at the end actually caught me off guard. I didn't know that was going to happen. That's so silly. Oh, poor Cub. He's just like, you're kidding me? What? Oh, that is so fun. I love this series so much. I think this is one of my favorites actually. Or I just um like mentally got myself to love this one the most because in my head I'm like, you love this one, so read it slowly, and it actually gets me to read it much better because I'm like, if I'm trying to make every sentence last as long as possible, then when I read it slowly, it comes out better. It's great, and I'm enjoying it. So I'm gonna try and do this more often. But I'm rambling. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. That was silly. That was fun. My brain immediately forgot everything that happened, but you know how it is. The memories, they don't stay. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Tell me what you thought about it in the comments, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.